Hi, I'm Jeff Gonzalez, president of Trident Concepts, and today I'm here with Brownells Daily Defense to talk to you about pistol follow-through. All right, so what does follow-through mean? Well, basically at this point, what we're doing is we're firing more than one shot, so we're getting into multiple rounds. And when we follow multiple rounds, for me to be efficient with those rounds and ultimately be able to compress the splits between one round and another, I'm going to need to make sure that I understand follow-through and I apply the principles of follow-through consistently. All right, so multiple rounds is where you're going to really see follow-through become very important. But even when you're firing one round, you still want to be able to apply the fundamentals of follow-through techniques. So what is it? Well, first, there is a sequence that everything has to follow. Just like a firing sequence or a cycle of operation, there are certain steps that have to be followed in order to make this work. The other thing that I will tell you is in the beginning, you're going to want to exaggerate your motions, really kind of elongating things. I encourage you to just linger there at the very end of that shooting string, because what you're going to do is you're going to start to see things happening in real time at that point. So, what are the steps that have to happen? Well, as the gun discharges, the moment the gun discharges, it's going to recoil. Now, there's really not much that we can do to stop the recoil, but what we can do is apply some of our recoil management techniques that help to bring the gun back to target. What our ultimate goal is through good recoil management, keeping the front sight during the recoil arc inside of what we call a sight box. And that's a little box at full arms extension, and as long as my sight's staying inside that sight box, I'm applying good recoil management techniques. Now, if I can do that, that follow through is going to keep that sight inside of that box, and as the gun comes back to the original aim point, what will happen is I'll be able to pick up that sight, which is the next step. I want to look at that sight and make sure that sight is appropriate for the shot required. So time, distance, and exposure come into the equation there. And if I feel like the sights are good enough, all right. If the sights are misaligned or not good enough for that time, distance, and exposure, then I'm going to have to go ahead and make those corrections. Once I've done that, what I'm going to do is the last step in the follow-through, which is to reset the trigger. Resetting of the trigger is the mechanical function of the firearm, and what it allows the firearm to do is fire that next shot. And what will happen is as you hit that reset point, you'll feel and hear an audible click. And when you feel and hear that click, then you can start taking up that slack and going through your firing sequence with your trigger management all over again. All right, so let's look at a couple of the dry fire techniques of what that's going to be like. So as I go 3, 2, and then I go 1, as I fire the shot, I got to manipulate this manually here. So I'm going to depress the trigger, and as I cycle the slide, what's going to happen is I've recocked the firing mechanism inside. And as I ease that trigger forward, I should hear and feel that click. Now I immediately start that 3, 2, and 1 again, depress the trigger, cycle the gun, I'll let the gun reset, and start my 3, 2, 1 all over again. All right, so this is a process that'll go the entire time that you're shooting, for as long as you need to shoot. Now, remember that during the dry fire process, I can't really simulate the recoil. But as I attempt to fire, and once I get that squeeze, I can charge the action, which can simulate looking for my sight again, reset, and then start all over. Once I'm back up on target, reset, 3, 2, 1, reset, 3, and 2, and 1. So while I manually cycle the slide, that's moving my sights all over the place, which is forcing me to move the gun back to target, forcing me to reconfirm my sights. And once I've done that, then I reset the trigger, and then I start my 3, 2, 1 all over again. So I really encourage you to do a little bit of dry fire before you get to the range, because this is something that you can practice in your home. Now, what are some of the common mistakes that we see with follow-through? The first one is not doing any form of follow-through. And what happens is as the shooter fires a shot, they immediately ride the recoil back and they break the gun down before actually making an effort to follow through on that last shot fired. The second mistake that we'll typically see is if they release that trigger before that sight has come back to target. And what I mean by that is that their finger has physically left the surface of the trigger. What's going to happen then is that you've got to now move your finger back to the face of the trigger and make sure that you've put it properly in the correct position, which under time constraints means that you're probably not going to do a good job there. The third mistake that we typically see during the follow-through sequence is if the shooter goes out of sequence, meaning that as the gun fires, they'll reset with the gun still in the arc of the recoil. Now what happens then is that it's normal, human nature, that once you have reset the trigger to want to start to apply pressure to the trigger. And when you start to apply pressure to the trigger, at some point the round is going to fire. But the gun is still in the recoil arc and the shooter hasn't confirmed their sights, so they're not entirely sure where the gun is pointed. So if you can work on those 3 common mistakes, you're going to find yourself moving through this in a much smoother process. So let's kind of look at this live fire. All right, so I'll assume a good shooting stance, aim in on the target. Once I confirm my sights are aligned, apply good squeeze to my firing grip, and then I'll count down. 3, 2, 1. Once the gun fires, I'm going to quickly get it back on target, reconfirm my sights, reset the trigger, start all over again. 3, 2, 1. Bring the gun back to target, reconfirm my sights, reset the trigger. 3, 2, 1. Bring the gun back to target, reconfirm my sights, reset the trigger, and then continue that for as long as is necessary during your firing sequence. All right, so hopefully these tips are going to help you achieve a positive experience the next time you go to the range, because part of shooting is learning how to be accurate. And as you start to learn how to be accurate, that's where the fun begins. So I hope that you start to learn how to shoot accurately and increase the fun factor as you go out to the range, which will hopefully increase the repetitions that you go out to the range. And if you have any questions, or if you feel like sharing your experience, please do so down below. Until then, I'm Jeff Gonzalez. Take care and stay safe.